This case is very, very, very heavy and sad from the very beginning until literally the very end. So just be aware of that, but I need to know your thoughts on this. Aileen Carol Pittman was born in 1956 in Rochester in Michigan. And to say her childhood was troubling wouldn't even begin to cover it. I would describe it more to be traumatizing to the biggest degree. Her mother, Aileen Wuornos, was only 14 years old when she married Aileen's father, 18-year-old Leo Pittman. But after less than 2 years of marriage, Diane filed for divorce. She was 16 years old when she gave birth to Aileen 2 months later. Aileen never met her father. In 1967, Leo Pittman was sentenced to life imprisonment for committing the worst of the worst crimes. His victim was a 7-year-old girl. And when Aileen was almost 4 years old, her mother walked out on her and left her to be with her grandparents. Her grandparents adopted not only Aileen, but also her older brother. However, they kept their real identities from the kids a secret at first, only referring to themselves to be their adoptive parents and not telling them that they were in fact their biological real grandparents. And Aileen's mom walking out on them was probably for the best. She was pretty incapable of caring about anything or anyone other than herself, and not once in her life did she love or care for her children in any capacity, let alone in the way that a mother should. But unfortunately, the new situation the kids found themselves in wasn't any better. The grandparents were awful. They had so many issues of their own, and they would take out all of their anger and struggles out on the kids, psychologically, physically, and when Aileen fell pregnant at only 14 years old, not by choice, she believed that the father could have either been her brother or her grandfather. She was sent away to a home for unwed mothers, and in March of 1972, she gave birth to a baby boy who was then immediately put up for adoption. Shortly after Aileen returned back home, her grandmother passed away from health complications, and her father insisted on kicking out both Aileen and her brother out of the house. And it wasn't long before Aileen ran away and began life on her own. Life on her own, though, was tough. She was a teenage girl with nowhere to go, basically living in the woods of Michigan in the dead of winter, surviving only by trying to make enough money by offering her services to men who would pass by driving by on the road. Throughout that period of her life, Aileen was either hitchhiking, meeting way too many terrible strangers, and or committing petty crimes. A childhood friend of Aileen's that would stay in contact with her would later say, quote, "She had the worst life of anyone I have ever met. When I first heard of Aileen's murder charges, it didn't shock me. If you had only been there and seen how terribly she was treated all her life, it only makes sense," unquote. It is really, really sad and unfortunate and terrible. Aileen Wuornos was 18 years old when she was arrested for disorderly conduct, amongst other things, and a couple of years later, she was arrested again for assault and disturbing the peace after a bartender made her very, very angry and upset. Hitchhiking across America, Aileen eventually made her way to Florida and was presented to this potentially life-changing piece of luck because she met a very wealthy yacht club president, 69-year-old Louis Fell, who fell in love with her, and the two of them got married in 1976. But by that point in her life, the kind of person that she grew up to be was the kind of person who held a lot of anger in her heart, which makes sense. I mean, can you blame her? However, the way that she would express her anger was pretty unhinged. Not saying that her behavior was right, because it wasn't, but knowing about her past, it shouldn't surprise you that she acted out more oftentimes than not. One night, she made a scene while she was out. She was just acting completely erratically, and she was once again arrested and sent to jail. Her now husband, Louis Fell, didn't like that because he lived what a lot of people would describe as a high society lifestyle. He had a reputation to keep, and this kind of marriage wasn't one that was going to work out for him. So he had the marriage annulled after only a few months. Following that, Aileen's life unfortunately resumed its steady downfall spiral. Her brother Keith lost his battle to throat cancer the same year as her marriage and divorce, and because of that, Aileen received a $10,000 check from his life insurance. But she very, very quickly spent all of that money on a luxury car that she ended up wrecking shortly after. Throughout the next 10 years or so, her life continued in this way, offering her services to strange men, still hitchhiking with really no real destination, and committing various crimes that ranged from forgery and theft to assault. But then in 1986, something changes. Because while she was out in Daytona Beach, Florida, Aileen met 24-year-old Tyria Moore, and they began a very intense romantic relationship that will last around 4 years. For the first time in her life, Aileen had someone. Tyria, known as Ty, became her other half pretty much. They lived together, they moved together, they survived together. Aileen continued working on the side of the highways. Ty occasionally worked at different motels here and there. It was not a glamorous life, but doing things together and having company for once in her life, it was the closest thing to love Aileen Wuornos had ever known. She would later say, quote, "I miss Ty. I lost Tyria over this, and the people that lost their loved ones and everything, I really think first about the people that lose their loved ones, and then Tyra second." Aileen's first victim was 51-year-old Richard Mallory. Richard was the owner of an electronics repair shop in Clearwater, Florida. He was last seen November 30th of 1989. Aileen and Richard were strangers, but they connected through her line of work. and they made plans to meet up in a remote part of Florida to do whatever it was that they were going to do. I think you know what I'm talking about. And according to Aileen's recollection of events, very shortly after they met up, Richard became very aggressive, very mean, and very forceful very quickly. Aileen had finding herself in that situation, she pulled it out and she twice in the chest. The following day, she confided in Ty and told her what she did. When Richard's body was discovered the following month, several miles away from his abandoned car, it shocked the town. Because of course it would, but he would not be the only victim that would be found in that state. Because after that, Aileen did it again, at least 6 more times, leading to the discovery of 6 middle-aged men, including a construction worker, a rodeo worker, a trucker, and a retired chief of police. Her victims were, like Richard, usually taken to an isolated place multiple times and then robbed. Their bodies were usually found weeks later after being dumped in some area of the woods on the side of the highway, and their vehicles were also often stolen, then abandoned. Aileen and Ty would also often sell objects taken from the victims at local pawn shops. In Aileen's own words, she would later describe the state of her mind during this crime spree, quote, "I really got tired of it all. I was angry about the Johnson," quote. She also stated, quote, "To me, this world is nothing but evil, and my own evil just happened to come out because of the circumstances of what I was doing," end quote. So, of course, the sudden discovery of multiple bodies around the same area in Florida had law enforcement on high alert, and before long, they were able to find a stolen vehicle. They run the plates, it belongs to a victim, they recover fingerprints, and after testing those, because Aileen Wuornos had been in trouble with the law before, meaning that her fingerprints were in the system, they got an exact match. And just like that, in January of 1991, Aileen was arrested. As part of their investigation, police officers tracked down Ty in Pennsylvania because different witnesses had often seen the two of them together, and they made her a deal. They told her, "If you tell us everything that you know, if you give us everything that you have, we will make sure that no charges are filed against you." So they offered her full immunity in exchange for her cooperation. Ty agreed, and she told them everything that she knew, but that still was not enough, because if they could, authorities wanted a confession from Aileen herself. And their plan to get that was to work with Ty to have her make phone calls to Aileen to get Aileen to confess, and that's exactly what they did. And with authorities listening to every word, Ty called Aileen pretending to be really scared, saying that she was scared that authorities were coming after her. And in one recorded phone call, Aileen, trying to protect the woman that she loved, promised, quote, "I will not let you be involved in the picture. You are not the one. I am the one who did everything," end quote. But on that phone call as well, when it was just the two of them, important to note that Aileen told Ty that everything that she did in self-defense, but that was all that authorities needed, and Aileen was officially charged in connection to 6 separate cases. On January 16th of 1991, she confessed. However, Aileen would only go to trial once for her first victim, Richard Mallory, because she was adamant that she was acting in self-defense, claiming that Richard. The other charges with the other victims either ended in her pleading either no contest or guilty, so those did not go to trial, but not because Aileen agreed that those were not in self-defense. She stuck to her word that every time that she claimed a victim was because that man had either overpowered her or attempted to, explaining that she had met up with all sorts of men for her entire life, and saying that her only motive in these 6 cases for fighting back was because those men were clearly there to make her their victim. Richard did. The other men tried to, but her story was that it was always in self-defense. She just let the others go because she felt that she needed to, quote, "get right with God," end quote. In Richard's case, she knew that she had no chance of the jury believing her, but she wanted to try. The trial began January 14th of 1992. Aileen pleaded not guilty. Before the trial, she spoke to reporters outside of the courthouse with desperation in her voice, saying, quote, "I'm never going to get a fair trial, and they're gonna electrocute me, give me life in prison, and I don't deserve it. I don't deserve life. It was just self-defense," end quote. She was right that the jury would not believe her, even though it came out that Richard Mallory had been convicted and given a 10-year sentence for proving that he literally was the kind of man who would do such a thing because he had done it before. Aileen Wuornos was sentenced to 6 death sentences. She spent over 10 years on death row at the Broward Correctional Institute in Florida. During this time, she read, she wrote letters, she gave documentary interviews that revealed a mind that held a lot of anger, grief, heartbreak, and rage. Once, reflecting on who she might have been, she stated, quote, "Now, if I do my life all over again, if I came from a family that was supportive and everything was financially stable, stable, I wouldn't be here, end quote. Her sentence was carried out and she became the 10th woman in the United States to ever be executed. Yeah, I told you guys, so extremely sad from beginning to the very end. Not excusing her behavior, but I do feel like if she had had a different kind of upbringing, she would have been a completely different person, is my opinion. But that is all I have for today. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to this story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.